The moment a badge begins trusting assumptions more than evidence, the uniform stops protecting the truth and starts testing it. That was the lesson no one inside the River County Police Department expected to learn on an ordinary Tuesday morning. The briefing room, usually filled with quiet conversations before the first patrol shift, had fallen into complete silence. One by one, officers assigned to Patrol Unit 12 stepped toward a long conference table beneath the watchful eyes of their command staff. No one had been placed under arrest. No one had been accused in front of the room. Yet every face carried the same uneasy expression as each officer carefully removed a polished silver badge from the front of a neatly pressed uniform and placed it on the smooth wooden surface. Portable radios followed. Department identification cards came next. Patrol vehicle keys rested beside them until the table reflected years of public service now sitting quietly in a single line. Officer Nathan Carter stared at his badge for several seconds before letting it leave his hand. It had represented duty since the first day he graduated from the police academy. Now it rested among the others without a single word of explanation. Across the room, Sergeant Michael Reynolds stood with the same calm posture he always carried during difficult situations, although even he could not hide the weight behind his eyes. Police Chief Robert Hayes remained near the front of the room, holding a sealed administrative folder that no one had yet opened. Every officer waited for an answer that did not come. Instead, the chief looked slowly across the room before speaking in an even voice. The evidence has already spoken. Our responsibility now is to listen. Those 11 words settled over the room more heavily than any raised voice ever could. No one argued. No one asked questions. Everyone understood that the decision had already been made somewhere beyond this room, somewhere inside reports, recordings, and procedures that could not be changed by memory or opinion. Nathan lowered his eyes toward the empty space where his badge had rested only moments earlier. He searched his thoughts for the moment everything had begun to unravel. It had not started with an emergency call. It had not started with a dangerous pursuit. It had not even started with a crime. It had started with a single traffic stop that looked exactly like hundreds of others he had completed throughout his career. 20 hours earlier, the morning sun had just climbed above the tree line as Nathan guided his marked patrol vehicle along Interstate 71. Traffic moved steadily under clear skies while commuters headed toward another ordinary workday. A black sport utility vehicle several car lengths ahead drifted briefly across the white lane marker before correcting smoothly. Nathan activated his emergency lights, and the driver immediately reduced speed, signaled properly, and pulled safely onto the shoulder without hesitation. The entire encounter appeared routine before it had even begun. Nathan stepped from his patrol vehicle, adjusted his body camera, and approached the driver's window with the quiet confidence built through years of experience. Behind the wheel sat a well-dressed black man whose expression remained calm, composed, and respectful. He lowered the window before Nathan could say a single word and greeted him politely. Nothing about the driver suggested confrontation. Nothing suggested urgency. Nothing suggested that within the next 24 hours an entire patrol unit would be standing in silence, watching badges disappear from their uniforms because of the choices made during the next few ordinary minutes. Officer Nathan Carter returned the respectful greeting with the calm professionalism expected during a routine traffic stop and explained the reason for the detention before requesting a driver's license, vehicle registration, and proof of insurance. The black driver acknowledged the explanation with a polite nod, retrieved each document without hesitation, and handed them across the open window. His movements were measured, his voice steady, and his expression relaxed. There was no irritation, no attempt to challenge the reason for the stop, and no sign that the encounter was anything other than an ordinary interruption during a busy workday. Nathan examined the documents carefully. The driver's license identified the man as David Ellison. The registration matched the sport utility vehicle. The insurance policy was active and current. Everything appeared completely normal. "Please remain in your vehicle while I verify your information," Nathan said before walking back toward his patrol car. Inside the vehicle, he entered the driver's information into the mobile data terminal and waited for the familiar sequence of database responses. Within seconds, the first return appeared. Valid driver's license. No outstanding warrants. No criminal alerts. Vehicle registration confirmed. Insurance verified. Nathan looked at the screen for another moment, almost expecting an additional notification to appear, but nothing changed. Every available record supported what the driver had already presented. He performed a second inquiry through dispatch, asking the communications center to verify the results independently. The dispatcher responded moments later in a calm voice that matched the information already displayed on his computer. Negative warrants. Negative wants. Negative investigative notifications. Everything returns clear. Nathan thanked dispatch, but instead of concluding the stop, he remained seated inside the patrol vehicle with his eyes fixed on the sport utility vehicle parked several yards ahead. The morning traffic continued flowing steadily along the interstate while tractor-trailers and commuter vehicles passed without slowing. The encounter should have been nearing its conclusion, yet Nathan felt reluctant to return the documents and issue a simple warning. He could not identify a specific violation beyond the original lane deviation. He could not point to suspicious behavior, inconsistent answers, or conflicting documentation. Even so, something continued to leave him unsettled, although he could not explain exactly why. He studied the driver through the windshield. David Ellison remained seated with both hands resting comfortably on the steering wheel, occasionally glancing toward the side mirror before looking straight ahead again. He never reached for a telephone. He never appeared impatient. He simply waited with the quiet confidence of someone who understood that cooperation often spoke louder than argument. Nathan finally stepped out of the patrol vehicle carrying the documents in one hand. Instead of immediately returning them, he approached the driver's window once again and asked several additional questions about the driver's destination, occupation, and travel plans. David answered each one politely and consistently without hesitation. Every response matched the information already available. There were no contradictions. There were no evasive statements. The conversation remained respectful from both sides. Yet the original purpose of the stop had already been satisfied. Nathan hesitated for another brief moment before reaching for the radio microphone attached to his shoulder. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. Please send a supervisor to my location." The request was acknowledged almost immediately, and several miles away, Sergeant Michael Reynolds quietly changed direction toward the interstate, unaware that one simple question would soon determine the future of everyone involved in the encounter. Several minutes passed before the familiar silhouette of a marked supervisor vehicle appeared in the distance. Sergeant Michael Reynolds guided his patrol sport utility vehicle onto the shoulder behind Nathan Carter's cruiser, activated the rear emergency lights for additional traffic protection, and stepped outside with the calm confidence earned through more than 2 decades in law enforcement. Before approaching the driver's vehicle, he stopped beside Nathan. "Tell me what you have," Reynolds said quietly. Nathan summarized the traffic violation, explained that the driver had immediately complied, provided valid identification, current registration, active insurance, and that both records' inquiries had returned completely clear. Reynolds listened without interruption before asking the question every supervisor eventually learns to ask. What objective facts justify extending this stop beyond the original traffic investigation? Nathan hesitated. He looked briefly toward the black sport utility vehicle before answering. "Something just does not feel right." Reynolds maintained a calm expression. Feeling uncertain is not the same as having objective facts. Nathan remained silent. Reynolds continued in the same measured tone. "Have you observed inconsistent statements?" "No." "Visible contraband?" "No." "Criminal alerts?" "No." "Outstanding warrants?" "No." "Conflicting identification?" "No." Reynolds nodded slowly before walking toward the driver's window. David Ellison lowered the window again as the supervisor approached. "Good morning, sir," Reynolds said politely. "I am Sergeant Michael Reynolds. Thank you for your patience. I have reviewed the information available so far. Before we conclude the stop, I need to ask one additional question. Do you have any other form of identification with you?" Ellison responded with the same calm professionalism he had shown from the beginning. "Yes, Sergeant. I do. He reached slowly into the inside pocket of his jacket, keeping every movement deliberate and clearly visible, then removed a slim leather credential wallet. He handed it to Reynolds without offering any explanation or comment. Reynolds opened the wallet and immediately recognized the familiar gold badge and official identification inside. His eyes paused for only a fraction of a second before he carefully read the credentials again to ensure he had not misunderstood what he was seeing. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Director David Ellison. Reynolds closed the credential wallet without changing his expression and returned it respectfully. "Thank you, sir. I appreciate your cooperation." Ellison simply nodded. Of course. There was no mention of his position. No request for special treatment. No suggestion that the stop should end because of his title. Reynolds stepped away from the vehicle and walked back toward his patrol unit, while Nathan watched quietly from several yards away. Inside his vehicle, Reynolds used a secure supervisory communications channel unavailable through ordinary dispatch traffic. He provided the credential information exactly as presented and requested official verification through federal law enforcement contacts. The response did not arrive immediately, but it came quickly enough to remove any remaining uncertainty. Identity confirmed. Director David Ellison. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Notification procedures initiated. Reynolds acknowledged the verification and ended the secure communication without additional discussion. He remained seated for several quiet moments, understanding that the confirmation itself changed nothing about the legal standards governing the traffic stop. The law remained exactly the same whether the driver was an ordinary citizen or the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Outside, David Ellison continued waiting patiently behind the steering wheel without checking his telephone or attempting to leave. Nathan looked toward Reynolds, searching for direction, while Reynolds stepped back onto the shoulder with only one thought occupying his mind. The next decision would not be guided by rank, reputation, or emotion. It would be guided entirely by the same objective facts he had been asking about since the moment he arrived. Sergeant Michael Reynolds slipped the secure communications device back into its holder and looked once more toward the black sport utility vehicle parked quietly on the shoulder. Nothing about the driver had changed since the stop began. David Ellison remained seated with both hands visible, patiently waiting without displaying the slightest sign of frustration. Reynolds understood that the federal verification confirmed the driver's identity, but it did not change the legal foundation of the traffic stop itself. A person's title could never expand an officer's authority, just as it could never reduce a citizen's constitutional protections. Reynolds reached for his radio and requested a secure supervisory conference with Police Chief Robert Hayes. Within moments, the encrypted call connected. Reynolds carefully explained the sequence of events from the initial lane violation through the completed records inquiries and finally the verified federal credentials. Chief Hayes listened without interrupting. When Reynolds finished, the chief asked only one question. "Has the driver requested special treatment at any point during the encounter?" "No, sir," Reynolds answered immediately. "He has been completely cooperative from the beginning." Hayes paused briefly before responding. "Then continue following department policy exactly as written. His position changes nothing. Let the facts determine every decision." At nearly the same time, federal notification procedures reached the nearest Federal Bureau of Investigation field office. Assistant Director Laura Bennett received the secure message confirming that Director David Ellison had been identified during a routine traffic stop. She reviewed the summary in silence before contacting Chief Hayes through an established law enforcement liaison channel. Their conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. Neither official discussed ending the stop early. Neither suggested that anyone intervene because of Director Ellison's position. Bennett spoke calmly. Director Ellison has never asked for exceptions during routine law enforcement contacts. We expect the same professional process every other citizen receives. Hayes agreed without hesitation. That is exactly how this department will proceed. The call ended, leaving both organizations with the same understanding. The integrity of the process mattered more than the prominence of the individual involved. Back on the shoulder of the interstate, Reynolds walked toward Nathan Carter, who waited beside the patrol vehicle with obvious uncertainty. "Nathan," Reynolds said quietly, "I need you to answer the same question one more time. What objective facts support continuing this detention beyond the completed traffic investigation?" Nathan looked toward David Ellison's vehicle before lowering his eyes. "I cannot identify any additional objective facts." Reynolds nodded. "That answer matters because our authority comes from articulable facts, not instinct alone. Once the lawful purpose of the stop has been completed, every additional minute must be supported by objective evidence." Nathan listened carefully without attempting to argue. The lesson was becoming painfully clear even before the administrative consequences existed. Reynolds continued, "Remember this throughout your career. A badge gives us responsibility. It does not give us permission to replace evidence with assumptions." Nathan took a slow breath and quietly acknowledged the instruction. Together they walked back toward David Ellison's vehicle. Inside, Ellison remained exactly as he had been throughout the encounter, composed, respectful, and patient. He had never mentioned leading the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He had never questioned the officer's professionalism. He had never attempted to influence the situation through authority or reputation. Reynolds understood that the next few minutes would conclude an otherwise ordinary traffic stop, but he also understood something else that no one standing on that quiet stretch of highway could yet see. Every word spoken, every movement recorded by body cameras, every dispatch transmission, every computer entry, and every decision documented during the encounter had already begun creating a timeline that would soon speak more convincingly than anyone's memory ever could. Sergeant Michael Reynolds stopped beside the driver's window one final time and offered David Ellison a courteous nod before speaking. "Sir, thank you for your patience. I am issuing a written warning for the lane deviation we observed earlier this morning. Your driver's license, vehicle registration, proof of insurance, and additional identification are all being returned to you. You are free to leave once I step back from your vehicle." David accepted the documents with the same calm professionalism he had demonstrated from the very beginning. "Thank you, Sergeant," he replied. "I appreciate the way you handled the situation." There was no criticism in his voice, no mention of his position within the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and no suggestion that the encounter should have unfolded differently. Reynolds thanked him once more before stepping away from the driver's window. Nathan Carter stood several feet behind his supervisor, quietly watching as the black sport utility vehicle merged safely back into traffic and disappeared into the steady flow of vehicles heading south. Within seconds, the interstate looked exactly as it had before the stop began, as though nothing unusual had occurred. Yet, beneath the ordinary appearance of the morning, an invisible chain of documentation had already begun preserving every important detail. Nathan returned to his patrol vehicle and completed the electronic warning through the mobile data terminal. The exact time of issuance was automatically recorded. His body camera continued capturing every movement until the encounter officially concluded. Reynolds completed his own supervisory notes, documenting his arrival time, his observations, and the questions asked during the roadside review. Dispatch archived every radio transmission exchanged throughout the stop, including the requests for records verification and supervisory assistance. Computer-aided dispatch records preserved the timeline from the initial traffic stop until the final clearing of the call. Dashboard camera footage from both patrol vehicles remains securely stored within the department's digital evidence system. Global Positioning System records documented the precise locations of each vehicle during every stage of the encounter. Secure communication logs confirmed the federal identity verification request and the supervisory notifications that followed. None of these systems depended upon memory. None depended upon opinion. Each quietly preserved its own independent record of the same event. Later that afternoon, Sergeant Reynolds completed a supplemental memorandum describing the sequence of decisions made after his arrival. He carefully noted that Director David Ellison never requested special treatment, never attempted to influence the officers through his position, and remained respectful throughout the encounter. Police Chief Robert Hayes reviewed the memorandum alongside the secure notification received from Assistant Director Laura Bennett, whose report similarly confirmed that Director Ellison had never sought any exception because of his federal role. The consistency between local documentation and federal observations immediately stood out. Every source described the same calm interaction from different perspectives. Before leaving headquarters that evening, Chief Hayes quietly instructed the Professional Standards Division to preserve every available record connected to the traffic stop for an administrative review scheduled the following morning. The order was procedural rather than disciplinary, intended to ensure that every decision could later be evaluated against department policy with complete transparency. As the building gradually emptied and patrol shifts changed across the county, servers continued storing body camera recordings, dashboard camera footage, dispatch audio, computer-aided dispatch logs, mobile data terminal activity, global positioning system history, written reports, supervisory memoranda, and secure communication records. Long after the officers returned to routine patrol assignments and David Ellison continued his federal responsibilities, the evidence remained exactly where it belonged, waiting silently for the morning when facts, rather than recollections, would become the most important voices inside the conference room. The following morning, before the first patrol briefing began, the Professional Standards Conference Room was already prepared for an administrative review unlike any routine policy meeting. Large display screens illuminated the otherwise quiet room, while investigators organized digital evidence collected from multiple independent systems. Police Chief Robert Hayes entered carrying the sealed administrative file prepared the previous evening. A few moments later, Assistant Director Laura Bennett arrived as the designated Federal Bureau of Investigation observer, accompanied by a legal liaison whose role was limited to monitoring the process rather than influencing its outcome. Hayes greeted both visitors with a brief handshake before addressing everyone gathered around the conference table. This review will be guided by department policy, documented evidence, and objective facts. No person's title will increase accountability, and no person's title will reduce accountability. Bennett nodded in agreement. Director David Ellison expects exactly the same standard that would apply to every citizen. With those expectations established, the review officially began. Investigators activated a synchronized digital timeline combining every available source connected to the traffic stop. Body camera recordings from Officer Nathan Carter and Sergeant Michael Reynolds appeared alongside dashboard camera footage from both patrol vehicles. Dispatch communications were synchronized with computer-aided dispatch records, mobile data terminal activity, global positioning system history, supervisory communications, electronic warning documentation, and every written report submitted after the encounter. Rather than reviewing each source individually, investigators aligned every record according to exact timestamps measured down to the second. As the synchronized presentation unfolded across the screens, the entire encounter became remarkably clear. Nathan observed a brief lane deviation before initiating a lawful traffic stop. David Ellison immediately complied, safely pulled onto the shoulder, lowered the window, and cooperated without hesitation. His driver's license, vehicle registration, and proof of insurance were all valid. The first records inquiry returned completely clear. The second verification produced identical results. Dispatch confirmed there were no warrants, no criminal alerts, no investigative notifications, and no conflicting information. Investigators quietly advanced the recording to the point where the lawful purpose of the traffic stop had effectively been completed. The room remained silent as Nathan stayed inside his patrol vehicle after every available records check had already confirmed there was no additional investigative information. The synchronized timeline continued until Sergeant Reynolds arrived. Body camera audio captured his first conversation with Nathan exactly as it had occurred beside the patrol vehicle. What objective facts justify extending this stop beyond the original traffic investigation? The investigators paused the recording. One investigator opened the department policy manual and compared the question with the written standard governing temporary investigative detention. Another investigator summarized the issue in a calm voice. Policy authorizes officers to investigate observable facts supported by objective evidence. Continued detention requires articulable justification beyond the completed purpose of the original stop. The recording resumed. Nathan answered that something did not feel right but could not identify any specific fact supporting that concern. Investigators documented the statement without criticism or personal opinion. The review then continued until David Ellison presented his Federal Bureau of Investigation credentials only after Sergeant Reynolds specifically requested additional identification. Assistant Director Bennett quietly confirmed that Director Ellison had never attempted to influence the encounter through his office or authority. Every recording supported her statement without contradiction. By the time the synchronized timeline reached its conclusion, the investigators understood they were no longer examining separate reports or individual recollections. They were examining one continuous sequence preserved simultaneously by cameras, computers, communication systems, and official documentation, leaving only one remaining question for the administrative investigation to answer the following hour. Officer Nathan Carter waited alone outside the Professional Standards Conference Room while investigators completed their review of the synchronized evidence inside. The hallway was unusually quiet, interrupted only by distant conversations and the occasional sound of office doors opening and closing throughout headquarters. Every passing minute seemed longer than the traffic stop itself. Nathan replayed the encounter repeatedly in his mind, searching for a specific observation that could justify the additional time spent beside the interstate. The more carefully he remembered the morning, the more one uncomfortable reality continued returning. He had trusted an unexplained feeling after every objective fact had already pointed toward the same conclusion. A few minutes later, the conference room door opened, and an investigator invited Nathan inside. Police Chief Robert Hayes remained seated near the end of the table, while Assistant Director Laura Bennett and the Federal Bureau of Investigation legal liaison observed quietly without participating in the questioning. Sergeant Michael Reynolds entered shortly afterward and took his place as both a supervisor and a witness to the roadside encounter. The lead investigator spoke in a calm, measured voice. Officer Carter, this administrative interview concerns your documented decisions during yesterday's traffic stop. We are evaluating objective facts, department policy, and your decision-making process. Please answer every question truthfully. Nathan acknowledged the instruction. The large display screens illuminated once again as investigators reopened the synchronized timeline created from body camera recordings, dashboard camera footage, dispatch communications, computer-aided dispatch records, mobile data terminal activity, global positioning system history, supervisory communications, and written reports. The questioning began with the earliest moments of the encounter. Did you observe a traffic violation before initiating emergency equipment? Yes, sir. Did the driver immediately comply? Yes, sir. Were valid driver's license, vehicle registration, and proof of insurance provided without delay? Yes, sir. Did your first records inquiry reveal any warrants, criminal alerts, investigative notifications, or conflicting information? No, sir. Did the second records verification produce any different result? Nathan answered quietly. No, sir. The investigator allowed several additional moments of body camera footage to play before pausing the recording at the exact point where Sergeant Reynolds had arrived beside the patrol vehicle. The audio clearly captured the supervisor asking the question that now stood at the center of the investigation. What objective facts justify extending the stop beyond the original traffic investigation? The investigator looked directly at Nathan. Officer Carter, please identify every articulable fact that existed at that moment and justified continuing the detention. Nathan remained silent for several seconds while looking toward the frozen image displayed across the screen. Finally, he answered with complete honesty. I believed something was wrong, but I could not identify a specific objective fact supporting that belief. No one interrupted him. No one criticized him. Another investigator simply entered the statement into the administrative record before asking a follow-up question. Can you identify any objective evidence that existed during the stop, but was omitted from your report or not captured by the recordings? Nathan slowly shook his head. No, sir. Assistant Director Laura Bennett then spoke for the first time since the interview began. Director David Ellison never requested special treatment, never attempted to influence the officers through his position, and never sought any exception to normal procedures. Every available recording confirms that statement. Sergeant Reynolds confirmed that he had repeatedly requested objective justification for extending the detention and that none had been presented at the scene. As the interview concluded, every source of evidence, Every written report, every recording, and Nathan's own testimony pointed toward the same unavoidable conclusion, leaving the command staff with only one remaining responsibility before the administrative findings would be formally announced. By early afternoon, the administrative review entered its final stage. Every recording had been synchronized, every report had been compared, and every decision had been measured against written department policy rather than personal opinion. Inside the conference room, professional standards investigators sat with Police Chief Robert Hayes, Assistant Director Laura Bennett, the Federal Bureau of Investigation Legal Liaison, and senior command staff. The atmosphere remained calm because everyone understood that accountability carried greater value when supported by evidence instead of emotion. The lead investigator placed the completed findings on the conference table before reviewing the timeline one final time. Officer Nathan Carter had lawfully initiated the traffic stop after observing the lane deviation. David Ellison immediately complied, safely pulled onto the shoulder, produced a valid driver's license, current vehicle registration, and active proof of insurance. Every records inquiry returned without warrants, criminal alerts, investigative notifications, or conflicting information. Sergeant Michael Reynolds arrived after Officer Carter requested supervisory assistance. During that roadside conversation, Reynolds repeatedly requested objective facts supporting continued detention beyond the completed traffic investigation. None were identified. Body camera recordings, dashboard camera footage, dispatch communications, computer-aided dispatch records, mobile data terminal activity, global positioning system history, supervisory memoranda, and written reports all confirmed the same sequence without contradiction. The lead investigator closed the digital evidence file before speaking clearly. The administrative review concludes that Officer Carter extended the detention beyond the lawful purpose of the original traffic stop without articulable objective facts required by department policy. The review further concludes that supervisory procedures within Patrol Unit 12 require additional administrative examination to ensure complete compliance with departmental standards. Complete silence filled the room. Assistant Director Laura Bennett looked toward Chief Hayes before making a single statement. Director David Ellison requested only one thing from the beginning. He asked that every decision be measured exactly as it would have been if he were any other citizen. Hayes nodded. That request has been honored throughout this process. He signed the administrative order resting before him and quietly slid it across the conference table. The document directed that every sworn member assigned to Patrol Unit 12 be placed on administrative suspension pending the completion of a broader supervisory compliance review. The action reflected the department's responsibility to evaluate not only individual decisions, but also the system's design to prevent procedural errors from continuing unnoticed. A short time later, Officer Nathan Carter and every member of Patrol Unit 12 assembled once again inside the morning briefing room. The same room that had welcomed officers at the beginning of every shift now carried a different purpose. Chief Hayes addressed them without raising his voice. This administrative action is based entirely upon documented evidence, established policy, and the findings of professional standards. It is not influenced by public attention, federal authority, or outside pressure. It is the result of our obligation to uphold equal accountability for everyone who wears this badge. One after another, the officers stepped forward and quietly placed their department badges, identification cards, portable radios, and patrol vehicle keys onto the long conference table. No one protested. No one attempted to challenge evidence already preserved by cameras, computers, and official documentation. Nathan Carter looked at the badge resting in his hand before carefully placing it beside the others. For the first time since graduating from the academy, he fully understood that authority alone could never protect public trust. Only disciplined judgment could do that. As the final badge settled onto the polished wood, complete silence returned to the room, while hundreds of miles away David Ellison continued his responsibilities at the Federal Bureau of Investigation, unaware that the most important lesson from that quiet morning beside the interstate had already begun reshaping an entire department from within. 8 months later, the traffic stop that had once seemed like an ordinary roadside encounter had become one of the most carefully studied leadership case studies inside the River County Police Department. New academy recruits filled a quiet training auditorium where large display screens stood ready to replay every documented second of the investigation. The lead instructor walked to the front of the room carrying only a policy manual before addressing the class. Today you will not study an extraordinary arrest, a dangerous pursuit, or a major criminal investigation. You will study an ordinary decision that changed the future of an entire patrol unit. The room fell silent as synchronized body camera recordings, dashboard camera footage, dispatch communications, computer-aided dispatch records, mobile data terminal activity, and global positioning system history appeared together on the screen. Every timestamp matched perfectly. Every report supported the next. The instructor allowed the recording to play until Officer Nathan Carter initiated the lawful traffic stop, then paused the video. "Nothing about this moment is unusual," he explained. "Every officer here will conduct hundreds of stops that begin exactly this way. Your career will rarely be defined by dramatic moments. It will be defined by ordinary decisions." The recording continued as David Ellison calmly provided his driver's license, vehicle registration, and proof of insurance. Dispatch confirmed every records inquiry was clear. Again, the instructor paused the presentation. "The lawful purpose of the stop has almost been completed. From this point forward, every additional decision requires objective facts." The class watched Sergeant Michael Reynolds arrive and ask the same question that had echoed throughout the administrative review. What objective facts justify continuing this stop? Several recruits quietly wrote the sentence into their notebooks. Others simply watched the screen without speaking. The instructor turned toward them. "Remember this question because one day another officer may ask it of you, and the answer you provide may determine whether your actions strengthen or weaken public trust." Hundreds of miles away, David Ellison continued serving as director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation with the same quiet professionalism that had defined him throughout the encounter. He never discussed the traffic stop during interviews, never criticized the officers publicly, and never sought recognition for what had happened. When colleagues occasionally mentioned the incident, he always offered the same response. Public confidence grows when everyone accepts the same standards. Assistant Director Laura Bennett later incorporated the case into leadership seminars for federal supervisors, emphasizing that cooperation between agencies depends upon transparency, mutual respect, and accountability supported by documented evidence rather than assumptions. Police Chief Robert Hayes also continued using the investigation during supervisory training, reminding future leaders that accountability exists to protect honorable officers as much as it protects the communities they serve. As for Nathan Carter, the months that followed became a period of reflection rather than resentment. He came to understand that authority was never measured by the badge pinned to a uniform, but by the discipline required to exercise that authority within the limits established by law and policy. Looking back, he realized that the most powerful voice present beside that interstate had never belonged to the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, a police chief, a supervisor, or even an investigating officer. The strongest voice belonged to evidence patiently preserved by cameras, computers, and truthful documentation that remembered every second exactly as it happened. Imagine standing beside a quiet highway believing experience alone will always guide the right decision, only to discover that lasting justice belongs not to the loudest voice or the highest title, but to the simple courage of allowing facts to speak before assumptions ever have the chance.